What's up, college football addicts? I'm not sure if you saw it or not, but Kirk Herbstreit had a complete meltdown on Twitter. I'm talking he was completely unhinged yesterday. Before I get started, I do want to say that I don't condone any kind of personal attacks on this channel. We can disagree and still be respectful, so let's keep it somewhat civil. But Kirk took the gloves off recently and went after several fan bases, calling them idiots and launching personal attacks on them. And if you come after fans, you kind of open yourself up to whatever they will come back at you with. So let's talk about it here on College Football Addiction. Very quickly, I appreciate you tuning in. If you enjoy our content so far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for us and let us know so that you don't miss anything coming up soon. Recently, Kirk got into it on Twitter and, again, completely lost his mind. I'm talking that this guy went unhinged. He literally claimed that he watched more football than anyone else in the entire country. Before I get into what he said, let's give a quick rundown of how we got here. It all started back when Herbstreit started calling for the pollsters to leave Florida State out of the Final Four. And this happened before the Jordan Travis injury ever took place. It happened on College Game Day when he put Alabama and Texas in, and this seemingly theoretical or this could never happen situation that obviously did end up happening later.
They're not a lock to me.
He used the QB injury as an excuse later, but he certainly had already started making arguments prior to all of that. And I'm sure you've seen Kirk's reaction to the Alabama touchdown, them needing a 4th and a million to beat an unranked Auburn team on the last play, where he's jumping up and down, holding Chris Fowler like he's just come back from war and missed his longtime sweetheart. It is a sight to behold, and it really shows where his emotions lied at that time. The excitement of Alabama winning was almost too much for Kirk to be able to handle. Then, after the conference championships, Kirk Herbstreit named his top 4. Now, during his defense of this, Herbstreit continued the defending of his ranking based on the argument that it was the 4 best teams. He kept repeating that over and over and over again. It needs to be the 4 best teams. The only problem is that this argument made absolutely no sense. According to Vegas, Georgia would have been favored over all 4 playoff teams. In fact, he kept asking for the top 4 teams, top 4 teams, top 4 teams. And even when he was called on it, even when people said, hey, we've never done that. It's never been the top 4 teams. We've never just taken the Vegas odds and said, put these 4 teams in. He said, well, then it needs to change. The last year of the 14 playoff, he said it needs to be different than it's ever been before. And then again, even his own logic didn't measure up because Georgia was absolutely one of the 4 best teams in the country. This started an avalanche of UGA and FSU fans absolutely taking aim at Kirk Herbstreit. An avalanche that is still rolling in February, nearly 2 months later. Recently, James Cook said this.
We are supposed to be in there this year. We in the playoffs. If Georgia is in the playoffs this year, we win it all. And I think they didn't want to see us go back to back. We lost 1 game to Alabama in the SEC championship and haven't been beaten the whole season. It was like the same scenario my last year in college. We won every game and lost to Alabama in the SEC championship, but we still got in and then went on and won it all. But I just feel like they knew what Nick Saban was, knew he was going to retire, so they tried to sneak him in one.
Now, Cook is absolutely right. Georgia got hosed with these rankings. And FSU did as well. But when you look at Georgia and you think about the metric, if you go with the logic of the best 4 teams, and you want to leave Florida State out for that reason, hey, they're not one of the best 4 teams. I think as Florida State fans or as people who support Florida State, I think you can kind of wrap your mind around that. Okay, we weren't one of the best 4 teams. We'll go with your logic. Then why is Georgia out? Georgia fans weren't clamoring as much to be put in because they understood that it's never been about the best 4 teams. It's been the most deserving. It's been the teams who have won games on the field. The results on the field absolutely matter. And that's why Florida State fans feel like they should have been in. That's why Florida State supporters, the Florida State program, feels like it should have been in. But if Florida State was going to be left out, then there's no chance that Georgia should not have been in the playoff. Now, I'm not going to tell you whether or not the college football playoff or Kirk Herbstreit absolutely knew that Saban was retiring, but I can tell you that there was some serious rumors out there that Saban was calling it quits prior to the end of the season, weeks before the end, so it's certainly possible. And Herbstreit was definitely pulling for Alabama for months and months and months. In fact, Georgia fans, you might not even be conspiracy theorists to say that Herbstreit was pulling for Alabama before the season even started. Here's a video from back on June of 2023. Check this out.
But what are we, May 31? It's hard for me not to lean towards Alabama in the SEC just because of what you described. Now, you got LSU, who made incredible strides in that first year with Brian Kelly. Got a lot coming back from that team. They beat Bama last year. They got to go to Tuscaloosa. So I would. Those three are going to be everybody's three. As we sit here right now, I'm going to wait to see where we are in August. But I would be in that Bama LSU, just a little bit ahead of Georgia as we get ready for getting into the summer months.
Now, onto those tweets that we told you about from earlier. Kirk Herbstreit said, no, and not necessarily the right no there, matter how hard this lunatic fringe portion of the FSU fan base tries, I refuse to hold this against the Noles and their real fans. Been a fan of the Noles since the early days of Bobby Bowden in the early 80s and will continue to respect that brand and tradition for as long as I'm covering college football. See ya in Ireland week 0. He then told this fan he was wrong for having an opinion after watching more football than anyone else in the country. He said, I'm not entitled to have an opinion on who the best 4 teams are after watching it 10 to 15 games live a week. So if I thought FSU was one of the best 4, I'm a genius. But since I didn't, I'm a fraud, a sellout, a shill. Makes total sense, you idiot. Someone asked how he watched the most games. He said, I watched 5 games during the window, 5 in the 3:30 window, call a game at 7:30 while having 3 others on in the bank of monitors. Then I watch as much of the 10:30 games as I can. Why? Because I love it. He acts like he's the only one that watches several games every weekend. I've certainly seen some pretty good setups that have multiple TVs. I've got 3 multiple TVs on my back porch, and then I pull an iPad out to be able to watch 4 games at once. And thanks to YouTube TV now, they don't sponsor, but they should, I get to watch 4 games on one channel. So I'm watching about 8 a week in every single window. So I don't know. Funny to me that he started to go off and felt the need to defend himself so much. And usually if you know you're right, you don't spend the time defending yourself against all odds, against all fan bases, against all freaking logic. But Kirk continues to go back and forth at this. He said that he was done arguing with the fringe lunatic fan base that was Florida State and others. And again, in February, 2 months later, he continues to do it. One final thought on all of this. Herbstreit has proven to be pretty passive-aggressive when it comes to lobbing attacks on Twitter. So don't be surprised in a few days when he starts playing the victim again and crying wolf. He will probably start crying and saying that these fan bases are making personal threats and taking it too far. And to that, we say that anybody who is making a personal threat against somebody deserves to be held accountable. There's no doubt. So be smart and don't threaten anybody on social media. But when he starts calling people fringe lunatics, morons, idiots, calling them out and making personal attacks at Twitter users and fans of teams directly on social media, don't poke the bear and then be upset when that fringe lunatic base goes off and does things worse than you did. It's always funny to me when you walk up to the bully and you smack him and then he beats your brains in and you cry wolf because he beat you up. Well, you probably shouldn't have antagonized. You probably should not have poked the bear, as they say. Now, I know Kirk is fed up with people absolutely going at him at all times. Personally, I don't have a huge moral problem with Kirk. I've interviewed him before. He was very nice. I do think he likes Florida State, but I think at the end of the day, he's kind of a corporate shill that ended up doing what his bosses at ESPN and the SEC wanted him to do, and that was to make sure that it was very well known that he wanted another SEC team in that playoff. And when it all came down to it, those in the College Football Playoff Committee ended up siding with him and doing what he asked. What are your thoughts on Kirk? What are your thoughts on the playoff? We haven't covered that specifically on this channel, have on some other channels, but what are your thoughts on Kirk absolutely going off like a raged lunatic on social media? Let's talk about it down below. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Join us here at the College Football Addiction.